Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's latest webinar, Quantum Computing and Crypto Risk, Readiness, and the Road Ahead. Before we begin, thank you so much for joining us. Our usual disclaimers, please keep in mind this event is offered for general information and educational purposes only, and it's not really intended to constitute investment, legal, or any other type of advice whatsoever. The views and opinions expressed herein within the webinar are those of our participants and myself. Personally, they don't necessarily reflect the views of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance or our participants' firms. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll address them a little later on in the webinar, but I am so excited to have this panel talking about this really, really important topic. Before we begin, I'm going to give all of the panelists from top to bottom an opportunity to say a really brief hello and introduce themselves. Christina, you show up early, so please say hello to the group.
Hi, my name is Christina Dolan, and I'm an engineer computer scientist. My experience with quantum is more of a hands-on. I have a company in Europe that's doing quanta pharma work, and then I'm on the board of a public company that has a post-quantum chip and is investing in a number of different areas of quantum.
Christina, thanks for joining. Ms. Hill.
Hi there, my name is Chrissy Hill, and I am joining from London. I am the founder and principal of Dreadnought Solutions, which is focused on strategic translation, governance, and scaling across the digital frontier. And my nexus with quantum has been looking at how companies and institutions and founders from across the pond are situating themselves in terms of quantum readiness across a variety of industries.
Pardon me, Chrissy, welcome. Anna, please say hello to the group.
Hi, I'm Anna Lin, Chief IP and AI Counsel for S&P Global. It's an honor to be on this panel with such accomplished colleagues. My relevant experience for this panel include I was a programmer at IBM before law. I'm back coding now and vibe coding with AI. I'm the sole inventor of 2 blockchain patents. And most recently, I deployed smart contracts to the quantum resistant ledger QRL 2.0 testnet, the first quantum resistant smart contract platform.
Anna, welcome. And then finally, the one, the only, Joshua Ashley Clayman.
Oh, thanks so much, Ron. And hi, everyone. It's an honor, as others said, to be here with this esteemed panel of experts. I'm Josh Clayman. I'm at Linklaters, which is a global law firm, and I lead our U.S. fintech efforts. I'm U.S. head of fintech and head of blockchain and digital assets. I also have been involved just deeply in the digital asset space for about the past 11 years, and with the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance and you, Ron. The place that I say quantum shows up for me in practice, I would say it's in a few different places. One is kind of the existential question or the cryptography that underpins digital assets, tokenization, digital identity, right? Thinking about that. Second, as sort of a regulatory and disclosure issue and a board issue for companies that are now having to think about quantum in their risk frameworks, including if they're planning to migrate or to a distributed ledger technology base or some sort of contemplating tokenization, right? And then a third question is like, how do you practically migrate these assets and think about this in a way that's legally robust and operationally realistic?
Josh, welcome. I have moderated a lot of panels and attended a lot of panels over the years. This is the most intimidated on a panel I think I've ever felt. So it's a privilege to be working with all of you. I want to move forward. And Josh, let me please start with you, and then we'll certainly speak to the other panelists as well. All of us individually and together have been talking about quantum for several years now. And I guess the question becomes, why does this matter now? What's changed? And I remember the early conversations about quantum and being told by computer science people who told me I'm a dummy, I don't understand, but it's many, many years away. I'm seeing really frightening dates in the future regarding quantum. Josh, kick us off and let's ask the rest of the panelists, are we moving from theory to that reality that becomes a risk?
So that's a great question, Ron. I feel like that's the $1 million question or the $1 billion question. So I'd say it's not an immediate crisis, but it's also not far off science fiction at this point. I mean, in some ways, it's a longer dated event, which some of our very technical panelists can talk about. But from a governance and regulatory and planning standpoint, from a board standpoint, it's a this decade and a now potential issue, especially with things like that we'll talk about later, like harvest now, decrypt later, or harvest now, forge later, right? So it's definitely the time horizon is now for aspects of this.
Yeah. Christina, let me come to you on this as well, because you have an interesting perspective and take on it from the operator perspective, from the entrepreneur perspective, sitting at that intersection across quantum and so many different verticals and cyber. What changed in your mind? Why has this become so predominantly concerning to so many different groups?
So I think over the course of the last 2 years, you've seen a lot of progress and a lot of statistics that have come out with respect to, for example, error correction. Because I like to think about these little qubits as being like 5-year-old ballerinas, and you're trying to keep them all in sync, and then over time they're totally out of sync, right? And they make a lot of mistakes, and so over time they've sort of figured out how to get those little 5-year-old ballerinas to get in sync for an extended period of time. And so, what that means is that you need less resources. You have a longer amount of time by which to utilize the state that enables for this information to be extracted. And so with the recent paper from Google, and over the course of the last 2 years, all of the data that you're seeing with respect to noise reduction from IBM, Google, and some of the leaders, the reality is that people are now able to quantify. It's not just that you've gone, it's the 20 times the improvement over the past 20 years, but it's also you have a quantification that's come out. And so now it's becoming real in terms of what resources are needed to make that happen.
Christina, thanks. And Anna, I've got some technical questions that are going to be coming up for you. But Chrissy, I do have to ask, and I know you and Christina and so many on the call globetrot in your conversations. What is the sense of this? I'm ripping up the script a little bit, Chrissy, on the other side of the pond. What is the perspective on what's happening for quantum in the UK and EU?
So recently I attended a roundtable, which was convened by Alice Bromage and Muna Everdeen Schneider. And it involves CISOs and other individuals from the technology departments at financial institutions, within the intelligence community, within defense, law firms, as well as pharma. And I think the general consensus around the table from that particular group was that they just felt this needed to move further up everyone's agenda. And that there wasn't necessarily more work to do, because a lot of the work they were already performing, if you just looked at it with a quantum awareness lens, you could build upon projects that were already running. For instance, in Europe, for the EU AI Act that is coming into force in August, you might be able to build off and should be able to build off a lot of, for instance, data labeling that you're doing in the context of compliance with that. So part of the, I think, frustration, frankly, from at least the technologists around the table was that because there's been so much change recently with this unstoppable tech wave that a lot of people feel is, crashing upon them, that, there almost wasn't room or appetite to talk about something else that felt opaque or perhaps intimidating. And that's where making this a more digestible topic, making it come to life for key decision makers, risk managers who may not be technologists, was very important to that community. And we were talking about ways that that could be done.
Christy, thanks so much. And I want to preface before we move on to the next slide, and I think all 4 or 5 of us have spoken about this. I often get the calls that this is crypto. Crypto is going to be wiped out because of quantum. It is far beyond crypto. Would you all agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm going to move forward if we could. We talked about what changed recently, and I know, Christina, you mentioned the Google publication. a lot of industry roadmaps are converging on this time frame. Josh, you alluded to this a bit earlier, 2027 to 2030. Christina, I got a phone call from someone earlier yesterday who said, no, those are all wrong. It's going to be, end of this year, Ron, your crypto is going to be gone. Can you give us a little bit of a perspective on what really those time frame looks like and what your thoughts are about it?
It's so funny because I was at an event with a lot of government officials and people wondering if there were nation states with more mathematicians that may have gotten this a little further, but just haven't shown their hand yet. So your guess is as good as mine in terms of the timing of this. But I have to say that if you look at the timeline on the improvements that have taken place with respect to quantum over the course of the past 2 years, it's pretty feasible that there will be some improvements. Not to say that they're going to go out and dismantle everything, because to your point before, I mean, this ability to be able to share your log on and verify that log on, it's this two key sort of relationship in which you use this math to be able to verify is used in everything. It's used in the European ID, Estonia's ID, like it's used in banking, like it's proliferated throughout all of our technology. And so there's a lot of people trying to figure out, okay, how do we put these new post-quantum algorithms into these solutions and make them so that you can replace them on a regular basis as they become more vulnerable to new technologies. And so there's a mass effort going on to actually get that in place. And there's some challenges with respect, we will talk a little bit more about that with respect to figuring out what that will be in this blockchain and crypto space. But there is a lot of work being done in this area. I mean, I just spoke at a national cryptography conference in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of discussion about some of the recommendations they're making, but the size and efficiency is an issue.
Yeah, Christine, thanks so much. Chrissy, I wanted to come to you because one of the things I've often been told was the limiting or gating factor for a lot of what's happening in the quantum space was, well, it's so expensive and it's so error prone. I know, Anna, I'm going to come to you shortly, I promise, to get us some of the basics. Is that still true, Chrissy, that it's just so expensive it's not going to commercialize quickly?
Well, I think that there are still some hurdles to cross with the technology, which again, Anna and Christina can speak to much more eloquently than I can. I can only talk about it in simple terms. But I always think about, when you're thinking about the technology, and to go back to Christina's excellent example of 5-year-old ballerinas and getting them in sync. Uh, you know, that's a really great way to visualize what's happening. I think what may impact those ballerinas is vibrations of any kind, right? And that's where when you can totally make things quiet, silent, motionless, I think that's when you can achieve more with the technology, as I understand it. But again, having 5-year-old ballerinas that are quiet and silent and motionless is still something I think many of us are trying to work out. But I think once the technology does get to that point where you can have more stability, then it will become more commercially viable. But as I understand it, we are a ways away from that. But again, as I said, Anna and Christina will be able to speak to some of the, I think, hurdles that are in place.
Let's do this, Chrissy. Thanks so much. And Christina, with your permission, I'll use the 5 dancing ballerinas analogy forever now. Anna, let's bring it forward. We'll come back to some of those challenges. One of the things I've been trying to do, I tried to explain quantum to some colleagues in financial services. Once I got to qubits and something called decoherence, I totally lost them. So Anna, I'm going to ask a quantum basics simplified series of questions for you. Tell us what a qubit is and why it enables that exponential processing. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the differential. Oh, it's just like current classical computing. My answer is it's not. Is that true?
Yes. So think of qubit as a piece of equipment that could encode information, and then when it interacts with other qubits, it automatically rule out impossible scenarios.
Mhm.
So qubits, so in classical computer, you explore in an exponential space, but in quantum computer, that you are not. So let's say recently someone break elliptic curve 15 digit with the signature break it and that is 70 qubits. So someone would say, well, it's 15 digits, but Bitcoin Ethereum is 256 digits. So if under classical computer, that's 10 raised to the 77th power, and that's more atoms, right? But then in quantum computer, it's not that way. It's like number of qubits. And yeah.
Anna, thank you. Christina, let me ask you to dive in on this, and I'll share with the group. And for everyone who's watching, if you've got questions, I see some of them queuing up. We'll reserve them towards the end of the webinar. Christina, the last time I programmed anything was in BASIC, and I did it badly. But to Anna's point, when we talk about qubits, talk to us a little bit about the challenges of that. There's so much power associated with qubit, but talk about decoherence. Talk about some of the challenges that Chrissy mentioned around climate and environment and how the data is processed in the quantum system.
Yeah, so basically there's a lot of material science that's going on right now that's making that, there's actually some gate, so there's various types of quantum systems, right? So there's the annealing, which is more like special purpose, and then you've got the gate functions, which is basically what you would need for Shor's, right? And when you think about quantum, you've got these and these little dancing ballerinas, these little quantum bits. The data that's represented is if anybody remembers, their wave math, it's a block, it's a unit, circle one, and so the data that it has are waves, right? And so your ability to take a lot of input in these very rich waves, right? Because the qubits are not, if they collapse, they become a 0 or a 1. But while they are, alive, let's just say, they're basically representing information in these waves. And so what's really interesting about the Shor's algorithm versus other algorithms, and there are many out there used in pharma, et cetera, but the Shor's algorithm is able to do this interesting thing in that you take all these waves to represent a particular number. And then what it does is that it cancels out the numbers that are not factors of that particular number. And then the two prime factor, the factors that that represent that particular number just sort of pop out, right, as part of this wave math. And it's because as Anna was saying, the numbers that are not prime factors, they cancel each other out. And the only thing that pops out in the wave math, where you see this periodicity, are the ones that represent those functions. So it's a much more immediate representation of something that was originally thought as being something that was very well protected. So qubits actually represent information when they are, not squashed down to 0, 1, represent a lot of rich information in waves, which is the reason why only certain types of math work in quantum, because it has to be represented as rich waves of information. Does that make sense?
It does, believe it or not. I did study your notes, and some of it actually got through to my brain, Christina. And one of the things I've been talking to colleagues about, we all come from the old school of classic computing, which was bits and bytes and everything represented as a series of zeros and ones, which we all understood very, very well. This is related to superposition and qubits, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to add one thing is that the moment you try to read information off a quantum machine, you're squashing that information. And so it's kind of like having a spinning quarter, and then you just, hit it and it becomes a 0 or 1, but the spin information is all gone, right? So part of the magic is trying to extract that information from the quantum to a location where that can be read. And so we'll be talking a little bit later about, the risk of things in motion versus the things that are just sitting around, like public keys, for example. And because of the fact that you can now get these little ballerinas, as I call these little qubits, to maintain their position and behave properly for an extended period of time, that means that math I was just describing has a longer time to be able to, float up those answers that are needed, and which means, and we'll talk a little bit about that, the risk that it creates, in that 10 minutes before the block is created. So.
Christina, thanks so much. I think we got a little background noise coming, so I'm going to give you a break, and I'm sorry I keep throwing questions at you. Josh, I'm going to come to you when we talk about implications for cryptography. Christina queued this up. I want to hear how Josh Klayman describes Shor's algorithm to non-tech people, because you probably know it better than any of us. But talk about these key algorithms. Anna, please dive in here, certainly from a technical, Chrissy as well. Why are Shor's and Grover's important to what we're discussing?
So thanks. Although, Ron, I've got to say, I do not know this stuff better than anyone. So I'll
you know
full
it better than me, so that's
right?
that's a start.
So I think a way to think about Shor's algorithm and Grover's algorithm for a moment, if you think about Shor's algorithm as going after locks on a digital kind of combination lock, right? Basically, it enables you potentially to recover private keys from public keys. So if you're familiar with crypto, you're familiar with, your public keys out there, and then you keep your private keys super secret. This is relevant for a lot of different kinds of encryption, not just crypto. And the fact that this algorithm can potentially allow you to derive or decrypt these private keys based on a public key, it puts blockchain addresses, code signing, and other things at risk. Grover's algorithm, if you're thinking about locks on your safe again, right? Unlike Shor's algorithm, which to my mind helps you find out the combination, Grover's algorithm weakens the symmetric cryptography. And so it makes it weaker. It weakens your lock, if that's a way. So the idea is that the public key cryptography potentially may need to be replaced or supplemented, and symmetric cryptography would need to be strengthened. So basically, you want to strengthen your hash, right, to battle against Grover's, and for Shor's, we want to find other ways to be quantum resistant.
Josh,
but I'd love to hear what the technical people would say about this.
Anytime I try to talk about cryptography or Shor's or Grover's algorithm, Anna gently shakes her head because I'm clearly getting it wrong. Anna, let's get a little bit technical on it. Josh really explained it from the perspective of what I'll call business minds, particularly, given how important public key cryptography is and that kind of symmetric encryption. Give us a little more in-depth on Shor's and Grover's algorithms.
I don't know that part, but I think what's relevant is that the Google quantum AI March 30th paper decreased the resource needed for Shor's algorithm by 20 times to 500,000 physical qubits to attack in 9 minutes, which is critical for Bitcoin's 10 minutes block time. So, and then also the Oratomic paper, right, the next day, building on the same Google quantum AI's algorithm, similarly reduce the resource needed for at-rest attack.
Anna, thanks so much. Chrissy, weigh in here, because we've alluded to cryptography at risk. Josh and Anna kind of laid that out for us. It's not just the foundation of crypto, it is the foundation of other systems beyond this. What are your thoughts on how the evolution of cryptographic systems are working now? I've seen some proposals that would be put forward that would make them quantum resistant. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Chrissy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well,
I got to interrupt. We've got a lot of background noise. Can I ask the panelists to all mute until you're called on? I'm really sorry, everyone. Chrissy, go ahead.
So I think this is where, listen, I went to school for words, not for numbers,
I
particularly.
keep doing that to you. I'm sorry.
Not for zeros and ones. But this is like Josh was saying, Shor's, I think, breaks it, right? Grover's weakens it. I try to make these things digestible for me and then translate that into, what factors into risk appetite, and, trying to make it something that is digestible for those who I speak to and I help advise. And this is where no one is an expert, right? We are
Mm.
all talking from different perspectives and it's changing every day. So, although we will perhaps all know in our respective areas more than most, because of the speed of change, it's very difficult for anyone to keep up with this
Yeah.
across whatever encryption system. And the one thing I would say about who this impacts, it really is everyone. So if there has ever been a hack of a company that holds your personal data and they say to you, oh, don't worry about it, it's encrypted data, right? And that used
Mm.
to be a standard response, especially from a legal liability perspective. That no longer holds water because the harvest now, decrypt later, or harvest now, forge later attacks, which we know are happening as we speak. And it
Mm.
is a vulnerability that we're all aware of, again, across industries, not just crypto related, is something where we need to be looking maybe from in the future. And should there, as a lawyer, be a case that, of a hack or some damage being done to someone, and it
Mhm.
is likely that custodians and exchanges in a crypto environment might be the first litigants in these types of situations.
Chrissy,
Mhm.
you can yell at me later. I know I keep sending you the technical questions. This is what I get for not looking at my notes. But I appreciate that, Chrissy, and it's a really good point. Christina, can I pull you in for one more thing here? When we talk broadly about cryptography, a memory just popped up, and I remember using an RSA key fob like 25 plus years ago. How far back are the systems that we're talking about? How far back do they go, and how at risk are they?
Yeah, I mean, it's decades, it's decades. And so I just wanted to provide a little clarity because the engineer in me just feels a need to do that. So when you talk about, so one of the magical things talking about, RSA is this ability to have a key distribution process, right? In which you can verify that I have the password without sending you the password. So in this networked world, that was really, really powerful. And so these technologies with this elliptic curve, because they were so efficient, became very prevalent. So they're used in computers that talk to each other. They're used in telecommunications. I mean, they're just, as I said before, Estonia and the EU identity still hasn't become post-quantum. So it's everywhere, even your bank accounts. I don't know any place where it isn't prevalent, right? Because this is a very key part of the architecture for distributed systems. Now, when we talk about like the vulnerability, that's Shores. And I described before about this waves and how you're able to sort of use the periodicity to have the factorization that it's based on pop up. And the reason why that was so popular was because they thought the math would be really hard to reverse engineer. And it's a fast algorithm. So, because you're trying to get that handshake, right? But I want to clarify one thing because we talk about Grovers and stored data. And yes, Grovers, most of our stored data on our computer is AES, and that is susceptible to Grovers, which isn't really that big a deal because it's just like the efficiency is not that significant, like what I described with respect to Shores. Now, what most people don't get when they talk about this is that in telecommunications, when you go through, for example, through a VPN, the the encrypted keys for the stored data on your disk, which would be the AEE keys, the AES keys, which in theory are more protected, those get shared in a handshake during the transmission. And in the harvesting process, that handshake is captured because they will decrypt it later, grab the AES, the keys to decrypt the data. So it's a different type of encryption, but because of the fact when you're taking your encrypted data and you're sending it over through telecom, the keys get shared as well. Unfortunately, what happens is that the key exchange plus the data gets stored, and then that will be the keys will be decrypted when these quantum computers are available, and then they will have the keys to decrypt the data. So it's a little bit of a subtlety there. So even though Grover's is not that hard because of the fact that it hands over the keys when it goes through transmission, it by default is a Shor's vulnerability. So when we talk about vulnerability, the fact that most data is sent, I mean, if you have it air gapped and it never travels anywhere, then probably you don't have to worry about Shor's, but any data that's encrypted will be susceptible if it's at any point been shared and that signature has been grabbed, those keys are there. So, Grover's is almost not that relevant in the equation because those encrypted keys get handed over during the transmission process. So, the key distribution model that is susceptible to Shor's is used in everything. It was a magical capability that allowed for two entities, two systems, two people to be able to connect without necessarily handing over their password. It was a sort of formula. So that's what makes it so vulnerable.
Christine, I really appreciate that. Chrissy, thank you as well. I wanted to peel back the layers a little bit as you're talking about the vulnerabilities here and get a bit more specific. When we talk about Bitcoin, and I tried to bring it up as you were talking, Christina, my apologies. We're not talking about an insignificant number of public keys potentially being exposed and that public key reuse that you mentioned, but it's not practical for us to live in a fully air-gapped world. What are your thoughts? And I open this up for the entirety of the panel. Which has the broader vulnerability, Bitcoin or the others that we're seeing? And we get to them in the next slide, Ether, Solana, for example. Christina, let me start with you because I think part of that's a technical question, but I want to open it up to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, so Bitcoin's signature is obviously vulnerable, but it uses Merkle trees and SHA-256, which is not as vulnerable to Shor's. But unfortunately, because of Taproot, which was developed to obfuscate complexity in signatures and contracts, that exposed the keys. You have all the original coins that, have been, instead of using a hash, they've actually, written out to the blockchain the public address. And then you have a lot of, other sort of reuse of addresses. So in those three scenarios. And so the calculation is about 30% of Bitcoin is exposed because of that public key, right? But in Ethereum, you have an ecosystem with many, many, many different layers, right? And so, and most of the other, blockchains as well. So as a result of that, you've got public keys exposed in many different functions. So you have admin accounts that have access to lots of funds. They have access to oracles. They have access to a variety of different things. So the ability to actually take those public keys, go in and use that to either change information with respect to some sort of a contract, or, smart contracts are immutable, but you can go in and make certain changes. And then the other is that you can do things like generate new coins, right? And so because you've got things like stable coins and layer two, you've got this ecosystem with a bunch of layers with exposures and, that were defined in the Google paper at 5 different layers. You could economically destroy an ecosystem. You could basically throw off, it's like you could do damage at many different layers, not just moving coins from point A to point B.
Christina, thank you. And I want to ask you to dive into a little bit because you and I spent some time talking about smart contracts and admin keys, the things that Christina's alluded to. Can you explain for the audience, and I open this up to the rest of the panelists as well, stablecoins inheriting that layered risk? I think that gets lost on some people who are not technologists. Is that something you could speak to?
Yes. So the Ethereum has a base layer that can be migrated by the Ethereum Foundation's plans by 2029. But the rest, they are on different layers, as Christina mentioned. So stablecoin is it resides in the Ethereum network, 200 billion of them. And that any step, anyone that has a signature, current signature on that part of the transaction would need to be migrated, and the whole stack, any dependency would need to migrate together and coordinated in order to be safe. I just want to say that to evaluate whether you couldn't be successful or not is to complete migration before quantum arrives. It's not the beginning. It has to be at the end.
Anna, thank you. Chrissy, go ahead.
Yeah, and just two things I think to help bring this to life, maybe. And so, from the stablecoin perspective, obviously, stablecoins, many believe, are going to be the currency of AI agents. And as we see agentic AI take off more and more, of course, Brian Armstrong was just talking a couple weeks ago about how his agents, can't get credit cards because they're not people. So, what are they going to use? They're going to use stablecoins. So if that is a fundamental building block of an agentic AI economy, the digital world, a cybernetic world that is being built, then you're baking in a, you know, a weakness in the system.
Yeah.
And that's something to talk about. And then also another thing, perhaps for the audience to help bring this to life, especially if they come from a proof of stake network or protocol, as opposed to proof of work, which of course Bitcoin is. Validator keys, right? I mean, that is, and bridges. These are all areas where, again, there's a fundamental weakness there. And Josh, I know that you've, looked at this as well from the perspective of many of your clients.
Thanks, Chrissy. Yes, and I think it's something that people are very focused on now. We've certainly seen just in the past few days, even papers, published about various blockchain ecosystems and networks about how they're planning to address the quantum reality, right? One of the things, though, I just for the broader, I guess, audience of business people and boards and things like that, I think while you're hearing all this stuff about quantum is coming, this is going to be the effect, I think one of the things to remember is post-quantum cryptography has been in the works for a while, and people are very focused on it right now. That being said, I think one of the biggest issues is that the time for potential migration to this post-quantum world potentially is a longer timeline than quantum getting here. And so if you're a business or, on a board and someone's contemplating moving from, say, traditional payment rails to distributed ledger-based payment rails or any sort of thing, or even not migrating, right? Thinking about these things at the architectural phase, if you look at how long upgrading the real world, so to speak, like legacy systems, cross-border infrastructure, public blockchain, it could take years. And we see that in this timeline and the G7 bank roadmap. So I guess I would just say here, quantum is advancing faster than our migration speed, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, technical folks on this call. And I think that asymmetry is where we should be thinking about things at the board level. Also identifying where in these businesses is there cryptography that we need to address.
Josh, thanks so much. And for all of the panelists, can we put an end to the timeline debate? And Christina, the reason I'm asking us to do this, I get calls or emails or text messages from colleagues across a variety of different industries. And it ranges from Ron, sell everything and go hide in the mountain because quantum is going to destroy everything, to don't bother me, Ron. This is going to be like the Y2K bug and nothing's going to happen. Let me start with you, Christina. Let's end the timeline debate. What's your professional estimate on where this begins to really impact the day-to-day of some of the organizations we're thinking about?
Well, so as I said before, this sort of magical key distribution capability is basically everywhere. For me, it's everywhere. So, there's a lot of work, as Joshua said, in terms of making agreements. I mean, I know I was just at the cryptography conference where I gave the keynote, and a lot of the cloud providers are saying they're on their way to migrate. But when it comes to the blockchain world. So just wanted to add one point, like stable coins, like Circle stable coins are minted on a variety of these different chains. They don't have their own blockchain, and these are vulnerable chains. So this layered approach of understanding that there's multiple layers of risk is an issue, which also points out the fact that you have multiple entities that have to work together in order to sort of agree to what the what the solution is going to be. And one of the biggest issues is that the keys that were used in this magical key distribution were very small. And now the key sizes that we're talking about can be anywhere from 37 to 78 times larger, which means that you have issues with respect to network congestion and, will the current nodes be able to handle it? So will you have less nodes, and then the 51% problem happens. So kind of Joshua's point, I believe that there are a lot of people working on big names that are working on lots of proposals going on, but I still think that you're not going to have the whole world melt down at the same time, because you have to put a lot of effort into each one of those, into each attack, and the systems are kind of expensive. So I think that what's going to happen is that certain things that are very highly targeted would probably be, sought after first, and not, everybody's bank account all at the same time. But in reality, the capability is going to evolve much faster than the technology is going to change.
Christina, thank you. I just want to be cognizant of time. Really appreciate that. Chrissy, so I shouldn't sell everything and go into physical gold yet?
No, I definitely don't think so. I think you should be looking to surf this unstoppable tech wave and not paddle against it or try to totally get out of the water. That's my short answer. But I
Anna,
was going to give you also an answer on the timeline, perhaps from a
go for it,
commercial perspective,
please.
which is January 2027. That's when the NSA is requiring anyone who they give a contract to have some sort of post-quantum preparedness in place. 2028, that's the year that the UK government will require the same, and the EU is not far behind. So if you're looking at this purely with your commercial hat on, can I get business? Depending upon your industry, and again, whether you believe contracts will be awarded or not, which is another question. But if you want to comply, if you want to be eligible, then you need to start thinking about putting these requirements in place.
Chrissy, thanks so much. Josh, I feel like there's a new compliance webinar we have to do just for what Chrissy's addressing. Anna, Josh, I want to give you a few seconds on this real quickly.
Okay.
And we're already behind, which means it's a good webinar. Anna, go ahead.
3 dimensions to look at to determine the timeline: hardware, error correction, and algorithm. Algorithm, which is the Google paper, reduced it by 20 times. So those 3 things work together to determine a timeline. At this point, no one knows.
Anna, thanks. Josh?
I was just going to say, you brought up earlier time to commercialization. I think, commercialization is a ways away, but bad actors or hostile actors or government actors, you don't need it to be commercialized at that point. You only need one, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important to remember. And I would just say also another facet of the timeline is, as we've talked about, the time horizon is now. If you are a party who wants to keep data private, whether you're a healthcare company, a bank, a government, or if you're talking about digital identity, if you don't want your identity and signature to be able to use it in a forgery later, because as Christina and others have mentioned, that handshake, as I love how Christina put that, to the extent it's captured now, it's captured now.
Yeah. Josh, appreciate it. And I'm going to move forward, but before I do, I'm getting the sense I should sell half of everything and go into physical gold. But appreciate that. Josh, let me stick with you because we've been hearing this phrase, harvest now, decrypt later. I want certainly you and the others to weigh in on this. Let's talk, what do we mean by harvest now, decrypt later? I think a lot of people are losing track of what that is. And who are the participants? Who are the parties who could be doing that in context?
Sorry, I was struggling to get off of mute. So I think that what's on the slide, I think is incredibly important, right? The idea is that data that is encrypted right now, right, or in the future, that people could be bad actors, governments, you name it, could be stockpiling it, storing it with a goal either to find out that data later, right? And if you have something that has a long tail of how long it has to remain private, right? Or, for example, like I just mentioned, in the case of signatures, to be able to forge. And there's a paper,
Yeah.
I can't remember Dino's last name, but he's at one of the UN agencies, and he presented about this harvest now, forge later,
Yeah, and
when
that's
I
the
was
next
in
slide,
London.
Josh. We have that put
Yeah.
together. Yeah. Christina, thank you, Josh. Christina, how likely is it that the majority of Harvest Now Decrypt Later participants, I'm calling them, are broadly state actors? And we're hearing a lot of noise about, I'm going to call it, North Korea and China. How relevant or important is that for us to be aware of when we look at Harvest Now Decrypt Later?
Well, if you think about it, these are people who are listening in over VPNs to see the handshake and the data going through, and they grab the handshake and that data, and store it later. So they're very targeted in terms of where they're looking for the information. So it's not sending school paper into my teacher, right? It's very targeted information that's being looked at. So I would probably say that the people who would have the most value in terms of information that's being transmitted, and who the entities are, you'd have to have somebody very highly targeted, knowing that that's the type of information that's going over that line, and who the relevant parties are. So I would probably say that state actors, nation states, bad actors would probably be the highest on that list. It takes a lot of resource and very focused target.
Thank you, Christina. Chrissy, I feel you wanting to weigh in. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I think, if anyone is skeptical about the preparation and the patience of state actors to actually, put together attack in this manner, they just need to think about the recent Drift protocol hack.
Mhm.
That involved, almost a year's worth of engagement from North Korea, meeting people in person, actually committing $1 million to a protocol in order to then gain access to the system and steal hundreds of millions. And that was, again, over a long period of time, very well thought out and coordinated with financial backing.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good ROI on that hack, right? It was probably about $1.5 million invested to get, I think it's over 200 million. So we're
Chrissy,
seeing it now.
Chrissy, good point. Thank you both. Josh, you mentioned Harvest Now Forge Later, and I want to open this up for you and Anna as well, because I think what gets lost in the conversation is how pervasively dangerous Harvest Now Forge Later could be in the future. Josh, I'm thinking identity, I'm thinking health records, I'm thinking the variety of things at this point we all take for granted. Am I overestimating that Harvest Now Forge Later concern, Josh? And I know you referenced it earlier.
I don't think so. I'm not going to touch it from a technical perspective. I'll
Sure.
leave that for Anna and Christina and Chrissy if she wishes to. But yes, I mean, I think absolutely part of, we've become very reliant on these technologies, these encryption technologies, to say, oh yes, here's my signature. It's one thing just to get data, to find out what data is, just like the JFK files. As things are released, yes, people are interested, but what are they doing with that data, right? They're just maybe reading it, and maybe, other things can come of it, exposing private materials. But the forge piece, I think, is where the I hate to say it this way, the rubber hits the road, right? Because that is something that someone can then take and use, right? Affirmatively use, and, destruction may follow.
Anna, thank you, Josh. Anna, weigh in on the technicals of Harvest Now, Forge Later, if you can, because in my mind, the Forge Later will impact an even wider variety of people around the world. Am I incorrect?
Yeah, you could forge the bank's digital signature, and that would be
Right.
big. But I wanted to just have a few words of practical advice for
Please.
someone who owns crypto. If your address is on a received only account, both Bitcoin and Ethereum, your public key is not exposed. So transfer your whatever you have, your account, into wallets that you haven't done
You mean
anything
hardware?
with it.
You mean hardware wallets, correct?
No. You just go to an account that just don't send anything on Ethereum, don't sign anything. Just on those accounts, then they are safe for now.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Josh. I cannot believe we're 50 minutes in and we're just about halfway through our slides. And I don't think the four of you can stay for another hour. For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for watching. If you've got additional questions, please queue them up. We're going to start going a little bit faster. We keep hearing Q day scenario. Anna, let me stay with you from a technical, but I want to open up so the rest of the panel. A couple of people reach out to me and they say Q day is coming up. It's basically Terminator 4. That's the end of the world. What's Q day, Anna?
Q day is when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is capable of decrypting a signature, crypto signature, right? So these are vulnerable to Shor's algorithm because they are discrete math, they are discrete logarithmic math. They are only one answer, and then but this so Q day you are not going to know about it. You are not this right. You might not know about it. They have every interest for state the state actors have every interest to keep it hidden while they drain your wallets.
Anna, that's a really good point. Christina, let me pull you into this because I've struggled with this as well. I think everyone on the call, many of us have been hacked in some way, shape, or form from social engineering, for example, and using your cell phone number, et cetera, et cetera. When Q day happens, will people just not realize it until days, weeks, months later? It's too late?
They won't. I mean, as I said before, there are people who speculate that a nation state with lots of mathematicians may have already sort of fine-tuned these formulas, especially because they've just released a Linux-style operating system for quantum that is being widely adopted. And so the reality is that it's a weapon, right? This is a big weapon, and it's not just in terms of completely destroying the ecosystems of crypto and accessing financial systems and every other system in the world that's in a network, right? I think that it'll be held close to their vest and will be weaponized in some way before it's leaked. Because why would they just go over and steal 100,000 from someone's wallet when they could like destroy the whole planet if that was their goal? And I think that it's going to take a lot of resources to get there. So it would have to be someone with big intent that will be the first to be able to use that. And I just worry that it might be a weaponized approach when it first comes.
Christina, it's a really good point. And Anna, thank you as well. Chrissy, I see that look on your face, and I know that means you have something to say, so I'm grateful. Let's talk.
We'll get there in a second, but I just wanted to say, because it is a weapon and it could be an act of war, it is carved out from insurance policies. And so again, from a business perspective, I think this is something very important to take away. And as I said, we'll cover more of this in the next slides, but I just wanted to point that out while the topic was fresh.
Chrissy, really good point. Thank you so much. Josh, I think about second order effects when we talk about things like Q day and when we talk about the impacts of this. And it is not limited to just quote unquote the wallets being hacked and the identity, for example, forged. But we're looking at confidence shocks. We're looking at liquidity stresses. How do boards look at those challenges? Do they see it as deeply as the five of us do?
So I don't know necessarily that a lot of boards are thinking about these challenges yet.
Should they?
And I think that's one of the challenges. Yes, 100%. 100%. And in fact, if there's a board, in my view, if there is a board and no one is thinking about whose responsibility this is, then that's a gap and it needs to be filled, right? This needs to be a lens, as Chrissy put it earlier, through which, the business is viewed, but also there needs to be serious responsibility sitting with some person or persons who are knowledgeable in this space to be able to help. So I think how boards are thinking about it is a challenge, just even getting them there. I think a lot of boards are feeling perhaps overwhelmed. There's AI, right? Is AI more immediate? There's so many different things that are competing right now. I would just in the interest of time, as I see where we are, I would just say, when you're thinking about this from a business perspective, thinking about disclosures, like we've talked about some of these coming challenges and lack of plan for migration, time to migration, vulnerabilities, lack of insurance, all these sorts of things. I mean, these are things that where disclosures, are appropriate, right? And I think really identifying where your risks are very specifically and then thinking about disclosures are important. For lawyers, the duty of competence, like we've said with digital assets and with other sorts of things, making sure that you've got the right people involved when you're thinking about the future. But yeah.
Josh, thank you. And again, in the interest of time, so sorry for everyone in the audience. There's so much to cover. Anna, I hope you'll forgive me because I know you mentioned migration challenges. I want to move through these slides quickly. I want to address one thing here, particularly for Bitcoin, Anna. All addresses must migrate. Can you put that in plain English for the dummies like me? How difficult that would be?
Yeah. So Bitcoin has 7 to 14 transactions per second. And you have 118 unspent ledgers or unspent accounts. All this 180 million need to transfer as a transaction each. So divide that, and let's have a year to a year doing nothing else.
Anna, thanks so much. And I know we're going to definitely have to come back to the technicals of migration challenges because we need to cover it for Ethereum. We need to cover it for DeFi. And again, I'm so sorry we're skipping through this. Christina, Josh, I want to pull you into the regulatory response where I, NIST, for example, 2030 deprecations, G7, Treasury, central banks are all aligned. Let me ask this broad question. And Josh, I'd like to stay with you for it real quickly. Are regulators across the world moving fast enough?
I mean, are any of us moving fast enough? To Christina's point, I mean, it's possible that governments or a certain government may have already cracked this code, for lack of a better way of putting it. I do think that regulators are thinking about it. Certainly, we have legislation and directives in the US talking about like requiring agencies to be quantum resistant, restricting the ability to invest in foreign, I forget the exact terminology, but basically investing in quantum elsewhere. So I think, like with many things, the technology is going to move faster than the regulators.
Christina, Josh now has me back to selling everything and going all physical gold. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I think the big challenge is that the new keys that are being proposed that have been tested are very large. And so the big issue is, I mean, I think for traditional signatures, those are, those standards are moving, quickly enough. But I think for blockchain, where the efficiency mattered because it has to do with network transmission, the size of the nodes, you want to make sure there are a lot of nodes in order to have to deal with the 51% rule. So there's a lot of proposals that are being worked on with very big players, but it's going to take a bit of time to come to that, to that conclusion in terms of, figuring out what direction they're going to go in. And then they want to make it so that, you can keep ripping out and putting new ones in the future so that you can use a variety of these different cryptographic tools so that it's not one size fits all. So I think that there's a lot of work that has to happen in order for us to be able to get to that point.
Christina, thanks so much. I have to apologize to all our panelists. I'm coming to our key takeaways. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to make sure we're covering for the audience. And again, for everyone who joined us, thank you so much. It's not an immediate, but it's not a distant risk. Josh, would you agree?
I mean, I think that framing it that way takes the responsibility out of the now. And so I would say a takeaway is identify within your organization a quantum risk manager who's going to have a role and accountability for having a plan of how to become quantum resistant, even though Q day may be far off or closer than we think.
Christy, do you see how elegantly Josh told me I was wrong in my first key takeaway?
I think she just helped you refine it a little bit and tied up the first and last bullet points on the slide, Ron.
She did. She educates me all the time. I want to ask one question. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Dina Ellis, shout out to Dina Ellis. The development in AI is happening faster than most have imagined. Could that speed up the development and usage of quantum? That's an interesting perspective. And Christina, I'm going to go to you with that. First, how much of quantum development that is not illicit actors or state actors will be driven by AI needs?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think all AI works in that wave formula that I described with the little dancers early on in the discussion. So quantum is not useful in every mathematical scenario. And there are some discussions of using quantum capabilities for AI. It's just not universally applicable. So I don't know if that's going to be one of the drivers.
Christina, good point. I'm going to stop the share. I think I could see you all. Let's go back. Apologies. Christina, Chrissy, Anna, Joshua, thank you so much. We've got no time left. If people wanted to find out more information about each of you, real quickly, Christina, where can they find you? Christina?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Chrissy, same.
LinkedIn.
Anna,
Same.
Josh, same. We'll
LinkedIn.
come back again. We'll have to do a part 2 of this. I think I omitted something like 8 or 9 slides, so apologies to all the panelists. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to leave it there. Hope to see you again, and thank you all for your thought leadership. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.